Yeah, I go by Denley Music, Denley, and that's my handle on Instagram, Denley Music, Denley Music.
So nasty that is probably.
I think that that's one of the things, like an affinity, right? That we all three mutually share is this affinity for music, and not just like music, consuming music in a passive form, right? But like really kind of delving into the history, right? Delving into kind of the context, and so, you know, this episode is very much dedicated to MF Doom, who had a huge influence, I think, in all of our lives, and just very devastating to hear his passing away. Um, you know, Especially when it was announced on the last day of 2020. It's already been a rough year, and that just felt like
I know.
just like the last, like the cherry on a shit cake, right?
Yeah,
Like to kind of get the news of MF Doom passing away, and even for me, it's taken days for me to process. Like
yeah,
I'm still in like the grieving process of MF Doom, not being here
certainly,
with us anymore.
certainly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely for me, like it's interesting that you say that because I think that's something that we take for granted. Like I remember growing up, like who you listened to was such a reflection on you. You had such little
Yep.
resources to acquire music.
yeah,
If you were gonna buy a CD, like if your homies were gonna hear you listening to that CD, like like it's just so interesting. I remember my brother and I totally credit my brother Pedro. Uh, he had no problem coming into my room and telling me some shit was whack if he thought some shit was whack. Like that was
yeah,
like,
Standards.
yeah,
yeah. And so it's interesting now when you ask somebody, and and I'm always asking because I always want to know what everybody's listening to. But
mhm,
I just feel, uh, I think Doom really represents that time period where like the music you listened to was hella important. You chose what you listened to. You chose where you put your resources, and that was like I'm a big. I won't say I'm a big Doom fan, but I was such a big Ghostface and Wu Tang fan,
mhm.
and like there was a time period where I didn't fuck with nobody unless they featured on a fucking Wu Tang album or if they
Yeah,
Sure,
were like affiliated, and
we
it
can
was
vouch
like.
for this too.
But it's
sure.
interesting to think about like that's where that kind of comes from of this like it was all about the music and not so much about you fucking the video or the fucking the person's looks or
Yeah,
you know and obviously it did matter, right? Because his that face and that mask was so iconic, but you know what I mean, like not in a commercial sense, not in a like put you at ease sense, in like a fucking fuck you if you don't like this or not kind of sense.
right.
Yeah.
Because when you're
Uh,
that age, it is kind of you're territorial about your music, and you think people aren't as intelligent as you if they're not listening to stuff that has depth. And that's definitely kind of, it sounds funny to say, but to a certain degree, that was the headspace I was in when I first discovered Doom, because, I was listening, I think prior to that, if you rewind a little bit to like 99, discovering things like, Black Star and Roots, Things Fall Apart,
oh
those
yeah.
those were extremely mainstream albums, but they were also kind of boutiquey in a way because they had like intriguing packaging.
Yeah.
And I remember Things Fall Apart had the thing with the back of the CD, or the back of the CD booklet would like make the picture of the entire group. So I can remember like bringing the booklets to school and putting them all together, and just again getting back to that idea of like rewarding you for closer inspection. So then away from that, like graduating from that, as it were, was things like Binary Star, Masters of the Universe, or like
Yep.
Cannibal
Yep.
Ox, The Cold Vein, like things that
Mm.
were still hip hop, but like started using weirder samples, more pop culture samples, things from your childhood or ephemera nostalgia that you might remember from a certain, without being sort of overtly like politically driven.
Yeah. But also like without being corny too, right? Like
Mhm.
that was part of it, right? Like, yeah, that whole Def Jux camp, rhyme sayers, right? And I
Yeah.
think and I would imagine like you, Matt, like we got into these artists, Aesop Rock, right?
Hmm.
And then you know, you start to branch out, right? Like, okay, so who's Vastair, right? Who's MF Doom, right? Like I know this
Yeah.
one person, but like
Hmm.
who's on this guest track, right? And so I think we probably both share that story in the ways that we eventually, looped around to MF Doom, right? And I think, I think we're both fortunate to enough to have been present and have, to know about him right when he was beginning to produce all these great albums, right?
Yeah.
And the death of, like you mentioned, right, the death of Sub Rock, his brother, and I think like, right, his origin story is, not any different than all the superheroes that we watch and we grew up on, and right, that we,
Sure.
you know, um, plunk money down to go see in the movie theaters, right? Like
Sure.
it was born in many instances, right? Like these origin stories are born out of tragedy,
Hmm.
right? Or like hitting rock bottom, and that's for me always really, kind of that's what really drew me initially, right? Like just finding out that backstory and him, trying to move forward, essentially like MF Doom and that persona is his attempt to move forward in life, right?
Hmm.
Like instead of you know being stuck in this moment of depression and with the passing of somebody, like a brother, right? Like
Hmm.
trying to pick up the pieces, right? Trying to make sense of it and trying to move forward with it, right? And,
Yeah.
and sometimes, right, you have to do that with putting a different mask on. The character
This is
makes
what
the
started
appearance.
it all for me, because our classmate Brandon, he was on a blog called Hip Hop Infinity in the early 2000s, and there's a
Yes.
guy, J.C. Graves was the name of this writer, and I only know that because I mentioned to Brandon prior that I was listening to it, and I said, thank you for introducing me to MF Doom, and he goes, oh, you can thank J.C. Graves, who is this
Oh,
blogger
Oh,
in the
let me
2000s
repay.
who did the review on
I haven't
Operation
heard that name
Doomsday.
in a decade at
Yeah,
least, because I
yeah,
used to
double
also be on
letter.
those message boards.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
Kind of
so
makes me curious who that dude was. Who was J.C. Graves? You know what I mean?
yeah,
like
this is
the,
Oh
the
man.
the nerddom of Doom is also one of the things that I think a lot of people were able to attach to, right? Because again, we already referenced the overall climate of hip hop at that time, right? 98, 99, we're talking about Bad Boy Records, we're talking about No Limit Soldier, right?
hmm
The
We're
rise of West
talking
Coast
about,
gangster rap.
right, like all these, super blinked out, right, rap. And here's this guy who is as New York as can be, right? Like to me, when I see Dead Band, like that video could only be shot in New York City,
hmm
right?
and it's wrapped up in so many things like cult cinema, comic books,
Yep.
other hip hop, other like rock sample, like Steely Dan, like
Yeah.
it's just
Totally.
got so many layers. Again, reward for closer inspection. Like prior to this album and others like it around the time, like you said, like Bad Boy and No Limit is a perfect example. It's like glitzy, like club based stuff that's limited to like MTV and like when you go to the club to dance to it or whatever, I didn't really think that there was other stuff out there as a
Mhm.
17, 18, 19-year-old that was a little bit more boutiquey and off the radar. And so I was really glad to discover things like this.
Also, I really believe that, what's the website that, with that does all the definitions of rap lyrics? What's the go-to
Rap Genius.
Rap
Genius.
Genius, right? Fuck
Yeah.
that. Like, MF Doom was one of the first people was one of the first rap artists that like people created blogs just literally just
Doing
trying
that.
to figure out all the references, right?
Right. All the
Right, like
footnotes, like, oh,
all
on
the
this he's
footnotes.
mentioning this weird Japanese movie. On
Yeah,
this he's mentioning this cartoon
Damn.
he saw.
fucking
You know.
yeah. Like I'm giving him, you know, some. He's a part of also again. He was a part of the reason why, as rap enthusiasts and hip hop
Mhm.
heads, right? Like we started to really dissect the music that we were listening to on that type of level, which I
Mhm.
think up until that point really was reserved more for rock music or
Hmm.
jazz or blues or other genres that had been established and had been kind of like accepted, right? And then Doom comes and he's like one of the first, the other thing that I think, when I think about Doom was just the wide range of artists that fucked with him. Like it's not just hip hop heads that
Mhm.
know Doom, right? It's somebody like Tom York, right?
Mhm.
Who's writing, posting a message, right, and on his Instagram about, fucking about Doom passing away, right? Like
Mhm.
it was so much. He was such a part of people's lives outside of just backpack MCs and backpack
Mhm.
nerds, right?
It's that
Hmm.
accessibility and that introduction of flaw and like vulnerability into his music that made him so, you know, desirable as an artist to the listener. And BP kind of touched on that when he died, and he said, like, I lost one of my favorite artists today. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something to the effect of, I'm not quite sure. Like, I didn't really rock with him when he kind of got co-opted by all the Adult Swim and
Yeah, yeah,
the
sure.
younger kind of like more, I hate to use the word, but like nerds, like beat nerds. But there's a reason why that happened. It's like we're getting ahead of ourselves in the timeline, but just getting like brought on by Adult Swim and appealing to it, it's self-referencing itself, right? Because he's already a comic book and a superhero
Yep.
nerd and a B-movie nerd, and then the Adult Swim thing, and then the music sort of started to take on more of that form, and then it started to, I guess what BP was talking about is like the more like insidious beat nerds of the internet, like
Yeah,
picking it apart. And
and I feel like by that time, um, like it became slowly started to become like a status thing to know about MF Doom,
Mhm.
right? And like I said, I think the release of the Nike Dunk shoe
Mhm.
very much facilitated some of that, right? Like and again, not to sound like, you're talking right now. If you're looking at this, you're looking at people who really give a fuck about music, like really give a
Right.
fuck about music. And so it's it talking with other homies who are like, you can't just talk about MF Doom right now and
Yeah.
like pretend that you were fucking with him then like throughout parts of his career. Like, I want to see receipts. I want to see like, come on, like what
Oh
are
my
your
god.
credentials right now? Like,
I hear you.
you
I
know what
hear
I'm
you,
saying?
man. It's hard not to be a little bit get off my lawn
But
about it,
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
know.
but I mean, like, what that isn't that such like prevalent to people who don't have that much? You like hold on to fucking music, or
fuck
you
yeah,
like you have to become the gatekeeper to that, right? Because
yeah,
it's
Yeah.
like I don't got nothing else. I got fucking rap. Like that's fucking all I have,
Yeah.
Like give me that shit, Like
Yeah, exactly.
I also think it's worth noting too that like the difference between having a CD and just being able to have so little access to music. Like fools were putting hella shit in their music because they knew you were gonna go back to that CD. They knew you probably only owned like 3 CDs because they were fucking $20 each,
Yeah.
and just like rewarding the fact that you probably are gonna fucking use your last $20 to buy a CD. Like I'm gonna put so much shit in here that you're
Yeah.
5 years from now you're gonna hear something different.
Yeah.
And I think also another thing worth noting is like where you listen to music. Like
Yep.
that shit is made for fucking headphones on the
mm-hmm.
fucking train or on the
Yep,
for us it's on the bus, right?
Hmm.
For the East Coast it's on the train. Cause like it's hella real, man. Like my girl said this, and it's hella real. She was like, I didn't really understand West Coast rap till I was stuck in traffic smoking a blunt. And then I was like, fuck, this shit is like made for this shit. You feel
Yeah.
me? And I hella feel that way about the Woo and fucking, and
Mhm.
it sounds like MF Doom. It's like, you're not in the club listening to that shit. You got it on your fucking phones,
Yep.
and you're staring at the fucking wall listening to that shit. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like that's the kind of attention it deserves, you know? Like,
Yeah.
and I just feel like that should be noted. You know, it's not a fucking social music, you know, it's a
Absolutely.
fucking internal, you know? And
Absolutely.
that's also probably adds to the nerdiness of it, right? It's a fucking
Totally.
antisocial type of music.
You know, just like you mentioned, right? What the second that, you know, I remember seeing the Adult Swim trailers initially and being really excited, and then at the same time, I was like, damn, like, I guess I gotta let you go, man. Like, gotta give you
Yeah.
It's
to
not just
the
it's not mine anymore. Yeah, I
not
can
Yeah.
I
feel
gotta
you.
give you back to the streets, man.
Exactly.
So and I think to kind of go back to something that you said, right? Like the nerdy stuff was also intentional, right? Like he he mentions, I remember reading somewhere or in an interview, he talks about like, oh yeah, you know, I would, you know, buy thesauruses, I would buy
Oh,
dictionaries, I would buy
Mhm.
all these different, you know, books, you know, surrounding the English language, right?
Yeah.
To have all these little phrases, all these little idioms, right? Um, that, you know, again, for people who are really into language, and I think for me that's how that was always a connection to, like, I love reading, I love playing around with words, I love editing, I love all these little things, right? That, you know,
Mhm.
for a lot of folks may not enjoy that stuff, but here, you know, here's MF Doom, an MC who embraces that, right? Like
Yeah.
it it's, yeah, again, like his genius. And you know, one of the last things that, so right now I'm, you know, I'm on sabbatical, I'm not teaching right now, but literally one of the last conversations that I had with my staff was around MF Doom, and it was
well,
because, so, and I know, and I know, Matt, you'll get this, and you know, get us back into talking about this, you know, landmark album, right? Mad
Right.
Villainy, right? Like, so one of my current teachers, or one of my current colleagues, he posted up, he's who is actually a PE teacher, and so he was giving us a presentation around, like, you know, um, here's a couple of easy exercises that you can do, you know, now that everybody's, you know, sitting down and, you know, working from the house.
Yeah.
And so he puts up this image of, but like this guy just
instructor. Oh,
flexing himself, right? He's
Like
like,
oh,
bodybuilder.
yeah, bodybuilder, right? But it's an old school guy, right? And I was like, I know who that is. That's Jack LaLanne,
Right.
right?
oh,
And I was, and I
oh shit.
literally put in the chat, I put, you know, the MF Doom line, right? Still in the
Still in
game
the
like
game like
Jack
Jack
LaLanne,
LaLanne.
right? And I put it, and
Don't rack your brain.
yeah. And so, and sure
Wow,
enough, you know, I had
that's
like
how you
3 or
knew.
4 other colleagues start, you know, oh, I love MF Doom, I listen to MF Doom, right? And I was just like, again, people that I wouldn't expect to know, they know him.
And
So
that's actually a really
Probably
good
couldn't clear it.
segue,
Yeah.
like not to get to zoom out a little bit from just like the hardcore discography stuff. I think another thing that was so great about MF Doom, and the fact that for me it was like early 2000s discovery, is that it directly coincided with like Napster, Kazaa,
yep,
file sharing
LimeWire.
in general, LimeWire. So it's like, all right, do you want to hear a little bit more of the Cuddy demo stuff that is
Oh,
unreleased? You can. The door is wide open now, because in the past it was like major label shit. It was hard. You had to do tape trading, or you had to
Mhm.
go buy like a CDR out of somebody's car, you know, trunk or
especially
whatever.
this, because this is not going on the radio. It's not like you're
Hmm.
going to be able to record it
Yeah.
from the radio, which is
Yeah,
a lot of ways people got music.
sure. So I mean that was big, and I think that's what engaged me more with the catalog, is like I could get all his guest appearances, I could get like the weird demo B-side shit, the remixes, and it just became this thing after school where I'd go on the blogs and be like, all right, who got the newest hot
Damn.
shit, you know? Yeah.
I wanted to show off one thing from my collection,
Yeah, please.
because you've already kind of shown off your stuff,
Yeah.
And so this is I like to say my consolation prize for being in a shitty 3-year relationship with a woman who will go unnamed.
Yeah.
Um,
Damn.
so one of the things that this person actually did, so they dropped the a Mad Villain Kid Robot collab, right? I want to
Oh
say
wow.
2009 or something. It's right here, right? I'm
Yeah.
gonna bring it up.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
so
is
the
it
one thing
from the
that
all caps video?
yeah,
Yeah.
so the one thing that this
Wow.
my ex got me before we broke up, and I remember she
Yeah.
got it for me for Christmas. And she got me
What?
the Kid Robot Mad Villain doll, and not just any of them. So there's two versions of them, right? There's
Yeah.
the green one right here, but that's not the one that I wanted. The one that I
Yeah.
wanted was the black variant version,
Oh wow.
which is even like harder to get, right? So
Yeah.
it's right here,
Man, that thing has been in so many
Damn.
videos and I didn't even know.
right? So yeah, I've yeah, it's been in all of our videos that we've been doing, right? It's
Crazy.
the original black variant version. I'm actually, you know, kind of doing this resale thing, and I don't quite regret it, but also, so they also released a second version of this, not done with Kid Robot, right? It was done with another I want to say another Japanese toy company,
Hmm.
and it featured like the Avalanche 45, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And I purchased that, and I recently, I want to say like within the last 4 months, and I know my homie Lawrence might be seeing this. Sorry, like, it got sold. Um,
Shit.
but I recently sold that, but like the prices of all the Doom stuff is like insane right now, and so
So you had the one with the Avalanche 45 and everything?
I sold it.
Yeah.
I sold it because I because I have this one, and to
Right.
me, this is the original. The
Right.
other shit is like the copy, and so but this is something that I'll never sell, and I know now it's going for like $1,500, something like that.
Damn.
Like
Right.
it's just skyrocketed, and literally you could have purchased this maybe for like 700, but now, with the passing of his death, things have just kind of skyrocketed. But yeah,
Yeah.
this I hold of all the possessions that I have, of all those collectibles that I've
Yeah.
collected over the years, like this is my most prized possession. Like I'll never sell this right here.
That's really
Wow.
great. I love it.
Wow.
Yeah. That video is so great with the comic book, and he's that character running around in the suit, like smashing through walls and stuff. So cool.
Yeah, we talk about somebody like, and rightly so, right? Somebody like Tupac who produced and cranked out so much quality content
Yeah.
in a relatively short time period, and I feel like with Doom it was kind of the same. It just kind of came in waves, right? Like
Yeah.
you wouldn't hear from him for a minute, and then suddenly like you had so much to consume, right? And then
Hmm.
like you mentioned, right, the instrumental series was always like the thing that was kind of like a constant in his discography, right? Like they were just always, volume one to, I'm not even sure how many, but I'll probably, assume that there's probably close to like 10 volumes at this point, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Of just so many, and then to kind of go back to like the Danger Doom stuff, right? Like this was also during the time where everybody was, when people were dropping a cappella albums, right? And doing like variations of, and like doing these blended albums, right? Taking two different distinct artists and kind of trying to recreate new classics, right? And I feel like Doom was a part of that, like with Jay-Z, right? Like so
Certainly.
many, Danger Doom or Danger Mouse really became, not a household name, but he became somebody to pay attention to because he dropped the what was it, the White Album, right? The
Yeah. The
Jay
Gray
Z
album,
the
the
Gray Album,
mashup.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, with flipping the Beatles references, right? And then a year
With
or two
Jay-Z.
later, he does the collab album with Doom, right? And so
Mhm.
Mm.
and then there's all this Doom music that has like Sade, collabs and remixes, right? Like that's a whole other thing. And so, yeah, like you mentioned, there's just so many different entry points with him, right? And I think everybody has, you know, they kind of entered his world at different junctures and different points in his life.
Totally. And the Sade thing is a full circle reference because he samples him on, or he samples her on on Doomsday, on Operation Doomsday. So it's like, you know, then you got people referencing the sample material and making their own remixes out of that. So I think that that's gonna be the thing that keeps him in the public, not least of which the fact that he's an incredible rapper with like reference upon reference, but it's mostly just all the nutritional value that's in his music, the references, the things that you can go and seek out. You can go watch a movie he talks about, or go watch Fantasy Island because you heard that line from the song about tattoo, you know, or just, so when he died, it's like, it's really sad that we're not going to get any more of that, because it's just this wealth of content.
Yeah, and I know that there's been a lot of news around, you know, the fact that apparently he was 85% done with the new Mad Villain album. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about like the prospects of that being released.
I know.
You know,
or whether he would have even wanted it to be.
Exactly right.
Because they've been talking about that shit for years, to the point where they even remixed the first one again with different beats just to keep people from knocking their door down, asking them where part 2 was at. And I thought that was really kind of quite lame, because it's like, that album's already classic. Why do you need to flip it again? But you know, it's not my stuff.
No,
It's just my
you're
opinion.
right. And I know exactly the release that you're talking about, because I feel like I also didn't buy, like I didn't purchase that one just because I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. Like,
yeah,
I only wanted it for the packaging, really, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there was like a, you know, I guess technically a Mad Villainy 2, but it's just remixed versions, and you know, I think a couple of B-sides that never made it onto the original album, and so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things kind of what comes out in the next year or so, right? As the vaults are now going to be officially opened, and you know, people are going to, you know, I'm sure they have a ton of MCs and producers reaching out to them to be part of the process to try to finish up that album and, you know, have it released for public consumption.
And just the way and the fashion in which the news was released that he had passed is crazy. That he died on Halloween, but it wasn't mentioned until New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that was interesting too.
Which is, I think kind of cool, right? Because it's like keeping it private for the family and then breaking the news, but also playing into the mystique of who he was as an artist and everything around it, and the overall just mystery of everything.
And how more fitting, right, of somebody who, right, had the ultimate dope hip hop costume, right, for him to die on Halloween, like that if there was ever a day, right, meant for MF Doom, it's fucking Halloween. And so I think, right, the world works in mysterious and weird ways, and you know, I don't think it's by coincidence that you know that was the day that you know, he exited and moved on to the next phase of his life, right?
Yeah.
Of his journey.
R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Yeah.